Have you ever looked back at someone you loved and asked yourself, how did I miss the signs? How did someone who once whispered, "I love you," end up draining every bit of peace from your soul, not all at once, but piece by piece? And what if I told you that nearly 2,000 years ago, a man had already written down a way to protect yourself from women like that? That man ... was Marcus Aurelius. He wasn't a relationship coach. He was a Roman emperor. But more importantly, he was a Stoic, and what he left behind wasn't just philosophy. It was a survival manual for your mind, your heart, and your peace. Now, before we get into the core of this, I want to ask you something simple. If you believe in personal growth through reason, emotional clarity, and ancient wisdom, then take a second to like this video. And if you've ever been hurt, not because you were wrong, but because you loved too deeply to see the truth, then you'll want to stay with me until the very end. Because the 7 signs I'm about to share with you, they might forever shift the way you see love and, more importantly, the way you protect it. But first, let me take you back into the life of a man named Ethan. He wasn't perfect, but his heart, it was pure. He showed up for people. He worked hard. He stayed loyal. He believed in love, not the kind on social media, but the kind built on honesty, depth, and effort. He met her in a quiet bookstore. She had this mysterious aura, like she was hiding stories no one else had read. She smiled as if she already knew how the ending would go. And just like that, Ethan fell. But as we saw with Ethan ... falling for her was easy. Understanding who she really was, that took time and pain. He worked hard to be good to her. He showed up. But what he didn't realize was this: she wasn't deep. She was just unreadable. She wasn't wise, just incredibly manipulative. And the Stoics, they had a name for this kind of discovery. They believed a person's true nature doesn't show up in the grand gestures. It reveals itself under pressure, through patterns, and in the small, everyday moments. Ethan didn't learn this all at once. He learned it slowly, through heartbreak, through a pattern of confusion and doubt, through what we now understand as the 7 signs of a foolish woman, told through the lens of Stoic philosophy. Sign number 1. She lacks self-control. Emotion rules over reason. Have you ever been with someone who made you feel like you were constantly walking on eggshells, where even a harmless pause or a delayed reply could ignite a storm? You try your best, you tread carefully, say all the right things, avoid the triggers, and yet, you're always the one apologizing, always the one being blamed for something that wasn't even your fault. That's exactly what Ethan lived through. At first, she was magnetic. Her presence lit up every room. She laughed like life was a celebration. She cried without shame. She lived in the moment, wild and unfiltered. And it felt exciting, passionate, real. But passion without discipline? That's chaos in disguise. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But Ethan hadn't realized that yet. And the woman he loved? She had no control over her inner world. Her moods didn't simply shift, they erupted. One minute, they were wrapped in a warm moment, legs tangled on the couch, laughter in the air, hearts wide open. The next minute, she was accusing him of not loving her because he didn't comment on her new hairstyle. He hadn't even noticed the change. But now, he was being emotionally punished for it. And so, Ethan began turning the blame inward. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. Maybe I should have called sooner. Maybe I really am the problem. Have you ever been there? Loving someone so intensely, so desperately, that you overlook how miserable they make you feel, just because you're afraid to lose them? That's what happens when you fall for someone who's led by emotion, not reason. One rainy evening, Ethan got a flat tire. Stuck in traffic, soaked to the bone. He texted her, trying to reassure her. "Hey babe, I'll be late. Please don't worry." She read it, then blocked him. When he finally made it to her apartment, dripping wet, exhausted, concerned, she was curled up on the couch, mascara streaked, wine in hand. Without looking at him, she whispered, "Don't talk to me. Clearly you don't care." He stood there, speechless. Should he comfort her? Should he explain? Or should he just walk away? And that's the trap. When someone has no emotional control, they don't just feel pain, they project it. They don't manage their chaos, they export it into your life. Then blame you when you struggle to carry it. Marcus Aurelius taught that true strength isn't found in muscles, it's found in emotional mastery. But Ethan's partner didn't master her emotions. She was mastered by them. Every disagreement became a performance. Every small issue turned into a battlefield. And somehow ... every single apology came from Ethan's mouth. Let me ask you something real. Have you ever apologized for something you didn't even do, just to keep the peace? That's not peace. That's quiet self-betrayal, because when someone can't control their own emotions, they will try to control yours. But that was only the first sign. There were more, and each one cut a little deeper. Let's move to the second sign Ethan missed, and how it shaped everything that came next. What Ethan thought was love, all the chaos, the apologies, the emotional storms, was really something else entirely. It wasn't love. It was emotional enslavement. At the time, he couldn't see it. He mistook her outbursts for passion. But every angry episode wasn't affection. It was a red flag, a warning. And maybe, just maybe, you've seen that kind of warning before too. Sign number 2, she believes the world owes her. Entitlement masked as standards. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a relationship where you gave everything, and it still wasn't enough? That was Ethan's reality. He gave her time. He gave her attention. He stood by her when things got tough, cheered her on through her dreams, made sacrifices that quietly chipped away at his own needs, just to make her feel supported. But no matter how much he offered, it never seemed to satisfy her. She didn't just want love, she demanded it, and not just love. She wanted perfection. At first, it seemed innocent enough. A few extra compliments here, a little more quality time there. Ethan thought she just had healthy relationship standards. But soon, those standards started to feel more like a list of conditions. A set of invisible rules that he could never seem to get right. One night, she looked at him and said, "You should take me out more. Really take me out. Treat me like I'm the most important thing in your life." Ethan heard her. He didn't ignore it. He booked a fancy dinner at one of the nicest restaurants in town the very next weekend. He dressed sharp, made reservations, thought it would make her feel seen and appreciated. But when the check came, she barely looked at it. Then, with a sigh, she muttered, "This is it? I thought we were past this stage. Don't you want to treat me like I deserve?" Ethan froze. He was confused, hurt, trying to read between the lines. "Don't I deserve something more extravagant?" she added with a cold smile. In that moment, he realized something painful. This wasn't about the dinner. It was about power, about status, about being adored. She didn't just want to be loved. She wanted to be elevated, worshipped even, put on a pedestal so high, Ethan had to shrink just to keep the balance. And the worst part? He started disappearing in the process. His needs, his voice, his joy, slowly fading as he tried to meet an ever-moving bar. Have you ever been there? In a relationship where your love feels like an obligation instead of a choice? Where you're constantly trying to meet expectations that keep getting higher, no matter how hard you try. That's when Ethan saw the truth. She didn't want a partner. She wanted proof that she was superior, that she was the center of the universe. And he was just her background. It was never about growing together. It was always about her growing above him. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." But what happens when the person you love has no interest in being good? What if all they care about is what they can take from you? One day, she looked Ethan in the eyes and said, "If you really loved me, you'd give up your friends, your hobbies, everything, and just be with me." He stood there hollow, feeling like a shell of who he used to be. He had always believed love was about growth, about supporting each other, about mutual respect. But this was control, ownership, possession. Have you ever been told, if you really cared, you'd change this about yourself? That's not love. That's a cage. And the more Ethan gave in, the more of himself he lost. His time, his energy, his identity. It wasn't his anymore. It was all hers. And it didn't stop there. Because the third sign, it's the one that breaks your spirit in silence. Let's talk about that next. Ethan had given her everything, his time, his energy, his love. But instead of appreciation, all he got in return was the unspoken belief that the world owed her more. And that's the thing about true love. It doesn't demand constant sacrifices from one person while the other simply takes. True love doesn't make you feel like a servant to someone else's ego. It doesn't leave you drained, constantly giving and still being told it's not enough. Here's the simple truth. If you're always the one giving, always the one bending, compromising, adjusting, and she's still never satisfied, then you're not in a relationship. You're in a transaction. And finally, after months of slow heartbreak, Ethan realized something needed to change. Sign number 3. She uses guilt to control. Manipulation disguised as concern. Have you ever found yourself apologizing over and over, without even knowing what you're apologizing for? Ethan did. He didn't notice it at first, but over time, something shifted. He became a man who couldn't make a single decision without running it through the filter of how will she react. Even saying no, even gently, came with a sense of dread. That tightness in the chest, that unshakable feeling that somehow you're already in trouble. It started small. She'd say things like, "Can you stay in and spend the evening with me?" Of course, Ethan wanted to. He loved their time together. But one night, he had already made plans with friends, plans made weeks in advance. So he kindly told her, "I'm really sorry, I already committed to them. But how about tomorrow night just for us?" At first, she just went quiet. Her expression changed. But a few hours later, her real response came in a text. "I guess I'm just not as important as your friends. If you really wanted to, you could have canceled. I guess that's what love is, right?" Those words hit harder than they should have, because they weren't just expressing sadness, they were loaded with accusation. She hadn't just been disappointed. She was punishing him, silently. And just like that, Ethan stepped into a cycle he didn't even know existed. Have you ever felt that? Like no matter how careful you are, there's always a cloud of guilt hanging over your head, even when you did nothing wrong? Week after week, Ethan started noticing a pattern. Every time he tried to do something for himself, go to the gym, stay late on a project, or even just enjoy a quiet evening alone, there it was again. That invisible pull. She never directly forbade him. No, her words were far more subtle and more effective. It's fine, I'll just stay here alone. Again, I'm used to it. Or, no worries, I'll just wait. Like I always do. And the painful part? Ethan started to believe it. He started feeling like he owed her an explanation for simply living his life. His plans began to disappear. His hobbies faded into the background. His passions became burdens. Why? Because he wanted to avoid upsetting her. Because he feared the look of disappointment in her eyes. Because somewhere along the way, he stopped believing he had a right to his own time. The truth is, Ethan was slowly disappearing, becoming a version of himself who apologized just for existing. His life wasn't his anymore. Every decision he made was designed to preserve her mood, not his own joy. And when she sent those texts, when she whispered those guilt-laced lines about how unimportant he made her feel, he didn't recognize them for what they were. Guilt-tripping. That it wasn't love speaking. It was control, dressed up in emotional language. She wasn't just sad he had other plans. She was angry that he dared to have a life outside of her. She was using guilt as a leash to pull him in, shape him, trap him. Have you ever stayed longer than you wanted to, just because you didn't want someone to feel hurt? Ever said yes when your whole heart was screaming no, just to avoid the guilt? That's what emotional manipulation looks like. It makes you question your instincts. It makes you doubt your right to choose yourself. So take a breath. Be honest with yourself. Because true love doesn't require guilt to stay alive. It encourages your freedom, your space, your peace. True love doesn't punish you for taking care of yourself. It supports you while you do it. Ethan didn't realize this at first. But slowly, piece by piece, the fog began to lift. And what he saw next? It wasn't just about her words. It was how she twisted the truth itself. Let's move into the fourth sign. And the subtle, damaging way it began to unfold. After being pulled through cycles of guilt and control, Ethan began to see things for what they really were. This wasn't love. It was manipulation, masked as care. But it didn't stop there. Sign number 4. She constantly plays the victim. Life is always against her. Have you ever been in a relationship where, no matter what happens, she's always the one who ends up hurt? Always the one who's been wronged. Where you're the one constantly defending her, even when something deep inside tells you the story doesn't quite add up. That was Ethan's life, again and again. When they first got together, everything felt full of promise. There was warmth, laughter, big dreams, and a sense of direction. It felt like the start of something meaningful, something real. But soon, that sense of connection began to shift. Her name was Sarah, and she had a very particular way of dealing with setbacks. Whenever things didn't go her way, whether it was a tough day at work, a disagreement with her family, or even a minor inconvenience, she would never stop to reflect. Instead, it was always someone else's fault. The world, in her eyes, was always against her. She was never the cause, never the one to blame. At first, Ethan wanted to be supportive. He'd sit beside her, patiently listening to the long stories of how unfair life had been to her, how she always gave her best, but people let her down. "Life is just harder for me," she would say. "No matter how hard I try, I'm always the one left behind." And so Ethan, being the loyal and kind-hearted man he was, tried to be her rescuer, her protector, the one who could make the world feel a little less cruel. But over time, a pattern started to appear, a pattern that grew darker the more he paid attention. Every problem had a villain. If a friend didn't return her text, it was because they were selfish. If she didn't get a promotion, it was because her boss was unfair. If a friendship fell apart, it was because the other person was jealous or toxic. And Ethan? He was always the one expected to fix things. If she was upset, he had to comfort her. If she was angry, he had to listen for hours. If she didn't get what she wanted, somehow it became his fault. Have you ever been in that situation? Where you're doing everything you can to make someone happy, but it's like pouring water into a bottomless cup? Ethan found himself tiptoeing through conversations, trying to keep her calm, trying not to trigger another crisis. More and more of his time was spent managing her moods instead of living his own life. And every time things fell apart, Sarah would sigh and say, "I don't understand. Why does everything always go wrong for me? It's like the universe just doesn't want me to be happy." And Ethan, always the protector, was left emotionally depleted. He was investing all his energy into keeping her together, but no one was doing the same for him. Does that sound familiar? Being in a relationship where your role is to carry the emotional burden, while the other person never takes responsibility for their part. That was the moment things began to click for Ethan. He realized Sarah wasn't just unlucky, she was unwilling. Unwilling to look inward. Unwilling to be accountable for her actions or her choices. Every time she blamed the world, she avoided doing the one thing that could actually help her grow, taking responsibility. And by doing so, she trapped herself in a cycle of self-pity and emotional dependency. And Ethan? He was trapped right there with her. Because here's the truth. When someone refuses to take ownership of their life, you can't build a future with them. You're too busy trying to hold together a present that keeps falling apart. Ethan finally saw it. He couldn't keep playing the hero in her never-ending victim story. He had to stop absorbing the blame. He had to walk away from the emotional weight that wasn't his to carry. So let me ask you, have you ever felt like the one holding it all together, while someone else refuses to take any responsibility? Where every problem becomes yours to solve, and you're constantly expected to clean up the emotional mess. That's not love. That's emotional labor, without support, without balance, and without respect. True love is about partnership. It's about mutual responsibility, mutual growth, mutual healing. But if you're constantly being asked to be the strong one, the stable one, the fixer, while the other person avoids accountability, then you're not in a healthy relationship. And most importantly, it is not your job to rescue someone from the victimhood they choose to live in. But Sarah's victimhood wasn't the only thing that made Ethan feel invisible. What came next? It cut even deeper and revealed another sign of a woman not ready to love. Let's talk about that in the next chapter. After months of watching Sarah live in a constant state of victimhood, Ethan started noticing something even more troubling. It wasn't just that she saw herself as helpless. It was that she refused to take any responsibility at all. Sign number 5. She never takes responsibility. The blame is always someone else's. Have you ever been in a relationship where, no matter what goes wrong, she somehow always finds a way to make it your fault, even when the facts are crystal clear? Even when the situation is obvious, she finds a way to twist it, and suddenly, you're the one apologizing. Let me take you back to Ethan's story. Because maybe, just maybe, you'll see yourself in this part too. Ethan had always been the forgiving type. He believed in giving people grace, in understanding that nobody's perfect, and we all make mistakes. But with Sarah, that grace started turning into exhaustion. At first, it was small things. She'd forget to buy groceries. No big deal, right? Ethan would gently remind her, and she'd reply, "I didn't have time, I was busy with other stuff." Okay, fair enough. Life gets hectic. People forget. But it didn't stop there. The small excuses became a pattern, and eventually, they bled into the things that did matter. One night, Ethan had planned something special. Dinner at their favorite spot, the place they both loved. He made the reservation weeks in advance, cleared his schedule, put thought and care into every detail. But when the evening came, Sarah texted, "I'm not ready yet." So he waited. Then another message came, "I can't go. I have too much to do." Ethan was disappointed, but still calm. He replied, "No worries. Can we reschedule for tomorrow?" And that's when it hit. She snapped back, "I don't know why you're mad. It's not my fault you didn't plan things better." Wait, what? Ethan had done everything right. He had planned. He had cleared his schedule. He had made the effort, and now suddenly, it was his fault. Does that sound familiar? That moment when you're trying to do something good, something thoughtful, but you still end up on the defensive, feeling like you're the one in the wrong. And this wasn't the first time. He had experienced this same pattern with smaller things, being late to events, forgotten errands, missed appointments. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't just an isolated miscommunication. This was a reflection of something deeper. Every time something went wrong, whether in their relationship or in her personal life, Sarah had one response: deflect and blame. Didn't get along with a friend? The friend was toxic. Missed a work deadline? Her boss was unreasonable. Forgot something important? It was Ethan's fault for not reminding her the right way. And Ethan? He tried. He tried to open up. He asked her gently to own up to things, to acknowledge that sometimes plans fall through, that it's okay to be wrong now and then. But instead of listening, she flipped the script. "You're just attacking me again, aren't you? You always make me feel like I'm not enough." And just like that, Ethan became the villain, not for hurting her, but for daring to ask for accountability. Have you ever been there? Trying to have an honest, respectful conversation, only to walk away feeling like you did something wrong. That's how emotional blame works. It takes your good intentions and turns them into guilt. Ethan began shrinking inside. His self-confidence wore thin. He started thinking twice before speaking, walking on eggshells. Not because he was wrong, but because he was tired of being made to feel like he was. He became the fixer, the emotional janitor, cleaning up messes he didn't create, smoothing over conflict she refused to own. But with every excuse, every finger pointed, every moment she refused to say the simple words, "I was wrong," Ethan broke a little more. Until one day, it hit him. This wasn't a relationship. It was a one-way performance, where he carried the burden, while she denied her part in everything. But what made it even more damaging? It wasn't just about blame, it was how She twisted his kindness into weakness. And that brings us to the next sign, one that slowly erodes your identity from the inside out. After carrying the emotional burden and watching her deflect blame again and again, Ethan came to a painful realization. He was doing all the work, while she refused to grow or take accountability for her part. And just when he thought it couldn't get more suffocating, it did. Sign number 6. She's always jealous, constantly insecure about your relationships with others. Have you ever been in a relationship where even the smallest interaction with someone else, especially someone of the opposite sex, instantly triggered tension? Where a simple hello, a polite smile, or a casual conversation turned into accusations, distance, or cold silence. That's the storm Ethan found himself in, again and again. He and Sarah had been together for over a year. On the surface, things looked fine. But beneath the surface, something had begun to eat away at him. Her jealousy. It didn't matter who it was. Whether it was a female colleague at work, a longtime friend, or even a server at a restaurant, Sarah always found a way to turn the most innocent moments into emotional landmines. And worst of all, she always made Ethan feel like it was his fault. One night, they were at a birthday party for one of Ethan's old college friends. While catching up, Ethan ran into Maria, someone he'd known for years. They hadn't seen each other in a long time, so they exchanged updates about work, family, and mutual friends. Just friendly conversation, nothing more. But Sarah didn't see it that way. The next day, she confronted him with a cold tone and heavy eyes. "I saw the way you were looking at her," she said. "You looked so happy. I can't believe you do that right in front of me." Ethan was stunned. He had known Maria for years. There was no hidden meaning, no flirting, just conversation. But Sarah's insecurity turned that one moment into a full-blown emotional battlefield, and this didn't just happen with Maria. It happened every time he interacted with another woman. It could be a colleague, a childhood friend, even someone he barely knew. Sarah would give him that look, a look that said, "You're doing something wrong," even when he wasn't. Over time, Ethan found himself on edge, second-guessing every conversation, watching his tone, watching his smile, trying to avoid saying anything that could possibly be misinterpreted. Have you ever felt that? Like you're tiptoeing through every interaction, not because you've done anything wrong, but because you know your partner is watching, waiting, ready to react? It's exhausting. Ethan began apologizing for things he didn't even do, feeling guilty when there was nothing to feel guilty about. Just the act of talking to another woman, no matter how brief or innocent, became a source of anxiety. But the jealousy didn't stop at conversations. If Ethan had plans with friends, Sarah would drop little comments like, "Oh, I guess I'm just not your priority anymore." If he had to stay late at work, the texts would come flooding in. You sure you're actually working? Is there someone else there with you?" She would accuse him of being distant, too friendly, too open. And every time he found himself having to prove he was trustworthy. But how do you prove something that was never true in the first place? And slowly, the weight of all that mistrust began to wear Ethan down. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually. He still loved Sarah, but the constant accusations, the daily pressure to defend his every move, made him question things. Was I doing something wrong? Was I making her feel insecure? Or was this all just a reflection of her own fear and lack of trust? Let me ask you, have you ever been questioned like that? Felt like you couldn't speak to someone without later having to justify it, defend it, explain it, just to avoid conflict. It's not just tiring, it's soul-draining. Ethan started to wonder, is this what love is supposed to feel like? Isn't love supposed to build trust, not constantly test it? Yet day by day, he found himself trapped in a cycle of suspicion and emotional pressure, not because of anything he did, but because of everything Sarah feared. Eventually, Ethan realized something had to change. He couldn't keep living under the shadow of someone else's insecurity. So, for the first time, he confronted her. But what happened next? It wasn't an apology. It was an understanding. It was something far more painful, the final sign, and the one that hurt the most. Let's talk about that next. After enduring Sarah's jealousy and constant suspicion, Ethan did something brave. He finally asked her the hard questions. Why do you feel this way? What do you need from me to feel secure? He didn't expect perfect answers, but he hoped for honesty. And that's when the truth hit him. Without trust, there's no real relationship to build on. The accusations, the jealousy, the emotional pressure, they weren't just signs of insecurity. They were cracks in the foundation, slowly eroding everything they had. And just when he thought he'd seen it all, the final sign appeared. Sign number 7, she disrespects you, repeatedly ignores your boundaries. Have you ever been in a relationship where you've clearly communicated your boundaries, only to have them dismissed, challenged, or outright ignored? Where every time you try to stand firm, your partner pushes harder, like they're testing how much you'll tolerate before you finally break. That's exactly where Ethan found himself. It didn't start with anything huge. At first, it was small, almost harmless. Sarah would borrow his things without asking. She'd grab his jacket when he was cold, or pick up his phone without saying anything, just to check the time. Ethan brushed it off. No big deal, he'd tell himself. It was just part of being close, right? But over time, the small things grew into something more invasive. She began showing up at his place unannounced, walking into his private space without knocking, interrupting him mid-conversation, expecting him to drop everything and focus only on her. And every time it happened, Ethan felt it, that quiet knot in his stomach, that inner voice saying, "This doesn't feel right." So he tried to speak up. He told her, kindly but clearly, "I need a bit more space. I need you to ask before taking my things. I need time to myself sometimes." But instead of listening, Sarah would brush him off. "Why are you being so uptight?" she'd say, with a smirk. "I just wanted to be close to you. You're making it a big deal." And just like that, the guilt would wash over him again. She didn't just dismiss his boundaries, she made him feel bad for having them in the first place. This became the pattern. Whenever Ethan tried to express his discomfort, whenever he tried to draw a line, even gently, she would either ignore it or twist it into an accusation. It was never, "I'm sorry I crossed a line." It was always, "Why are you pushing me away?" And as the months passed, the violations became more serious. There was one evening in particular that changed everything. Ethan had been going through a stressful week, long hours, tough meetings, personal pressure building up. He told Sarah in advance, "I need tonight to myself. Just a few quiet hours to recharge. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" She said nothing at the time. But that evening, without warning, she showed up at his door. "What's the big deal?" she asked, as if nothing had happened. "I just wanted to spend time with you. You're always so busy anyway." Ethan stood there in disbelief. This wasn't about love. It wasn't about closeness. It was about control. He had clearly expressed a need. She had clearly ignored it. And that's what hurt the most, not just the action, but the lack of respect behind it. Have you ever experienced that? You open up. You explain your needs. And instead of being met with understanding, you're met with disregard or worse, guilt. It's exhausting. It's frustrating. And over time it wears you down. Ethan tried to stay patient. He tried to explain, again and again, that boundaries aren't about distance. They're about respect. But Sarah didn't want to understand, because for her, his boundaries were an inconvenience, something to be stepped over, not honored. And the more she ignored them, the more Ethan began to see the truth. He wasn't being loved. He was being controlled, slowly, quietly, and consistently. But there was still one final test. One moment that would force Ethan to decide. Would he keep losing himself, or finally walk away? Let's talk about that in the last chapter. Even after Ethan set clear boundaries and calmly explained his needs, Sarah continued to either ignore them or twist the situation, making him feel like the problem. What he needed, respect, both emotional and physical, was always second to her impulses and moods. And that's what slowly broke him. The most damaging part wasn't the outbursts. It wasn't even the control. It was the gaslighting. She'd say things like, "You're overreacting. You know I didn't mean it like that." And somehow by the end of those conversations, Ethan would be the one apologizing. Not for hurting her, but for asking for respect. It stopped being about the occasional argument. It became a pattern, a quiet erasure of his needs, a daily dismissal of his emotions. As if in her world, what he felt simply didn't count. In Sarah's eyes, her wants always came first. No matter how clearly Ethan communicated, she refused to listen, or worse, made him feel guilty for even trying. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever felt that way? Like you're constantly speaking up for yourself, and yet your words vanish into thin air? Like your needs are treated as annoyances? Like you're being made to feel too sensitive, just because you asked to be respected? If you've ever been there, I see you, and I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your story, even if it's just one moment. Maybe a time when you had to defend your boundaries, or that gut-wrenching realization that your partner simply didn't value them. Because here's the truth. Understanding when your boundaries are being crossed is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the first powerful step toward reclaiming your peace and self-worth. You deserve a relationship where your voice is heard, your space is honored, and your emotional safety matters. These aren't just random red flags, they're signs. Clear, painful, and deeply rooted in human behavior, something even the Stoics understood. Marcus Aurelius never wrote about modern relationships, but he understood people. He knew that some are not evil, just undisciplined. Not malicious, just guided by impulse, ego, and in the eyes of Stoicism, a foolish woman is not beyond understanding, she's simply untrained in mastering herself. But if you've loved someone like that, it's not your shame. It's your lesson. Ethan didn't walk away because he stopped loving her. He walked away because for the first time, he started loving himself. So let me leave you with this. Are you in a relationship that builds you up, or slowly breaks you down? Which of these signs hit you the hardest? What's your story? Because your story might just save someone else's heart. And if you've made it this far, you're not just a viewer. You're someone who's ready to grow, to heal, to choose peace over chaos. So if this resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Like the video, leave a comment, and share this with someone who might need it. You never know. One honest conversation could change someone's life. Thank you for watching, and until next time, choose yourself every time.